Welcome everyone. Today we have a new sources build for Diablo 4 Season 5. Now looking behind me, this is gonna be a sources build that only uses level 15 glyphs, and also it uses no Uber Uniques. So a lot of our viewers has been asking me to look for a build that doesn't require Uber Uniques and also can auto-seek and also use the latest meta. And here we can see a demonstration from a Chinese content creator speed clearing tier 93 of the pit. And you can see this build is not using force bot, but rather it is using chain lightning. So this is very similar to ball lightning, and you'll be auto-seeking and also killing enemies very fast and also speedy in the higher pit dungeons and also farming a lot of resource without needing any Uber Uniques. Now in comparison, if you do have the Uber Uniques, you will definitely clear the boss even faster. And later in this video, we'll talk about the choices and options for using Uber Uniques for this version. Now briefly explaining the concept of this particular build, we're still stacking critical chance, critical damage, and this will auto-proc additional lightning. And because of the lightning spear's special aspects, this allows us to proc lightning multiple times, and we can also become a close range mage. Very similar to ball lightning, if you become close to the enemies, you'll be doing even more damage and getting even more stacks, picking up more unstable current, and also gaining even more mana. Now before we jump over to the updated version of the builder's guide, I would like to give credits and also thanks for the Chinese content creator Moyu Guanjun Dan. And if you guys do want to see the full version of his replays, I'll have the links available. So I have translated his Chinese version of the skill set and also the gears. And right away guys, once you come over to this particular builder's guide, you can see there will be two versions. The Force Orb version is stronger and also faster, but it does take consideration that you have at least two of the Uber Uniques. And the second version, if you come over to the no Uber version, this is the current version I'm sharing with you guys. So make sure if you try to follow this build, click the right tab over here to follow different versions. Now one of the reasons I want to do the no Uber version is that if you like me leveling up your new sources, because I just got my Barbarian to level 100, then I just don't want to play Barbarian anymore, so I'm leveling up my sources, right? So one of the reasons we have the no Uber version is that you might not have all the Uber unique items like the endgame build over here. So this will be a slightly weaker transitional build. And later we'll be looking into how to upgrade this build with a Ring of Stardust, with Shackle, and also with Teros Might. So briefly going through the aspects and also choices of the unique items. We'll be using multiple aspects that give us additional damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, and also as we cast conjunction spells. We'll be having additional damage coming from chain lightning that deals even more damage against boss and also crowd control targets. And here we'll be dealing additional damage against vulnerable enemies while having a barrier. Of course, one of the centerpieces for this build is using lightning spears that summons lightning arc that auto-seeks and auto-destroy enemies. And here we're actually using two one-handed weapon and also catalysts instead of using a two-handed weapon to allow for more aspects. One of the final aspects we'll be going is to gain additional mana regen against group of enemies, and this enables us to deal even higher damage as we have tons of resource gain and also maximum resource. Now the unique of choices are pretty interesting. We'll be using a new unique with lower enhancement, which allows us to have increased critical chance with higher primary resource and even higher critical strike damage. So this is one of the reasons you can see some of the gear pieces will have maximum resource for this particular build. And this allows us to deal even more damage having more maximum resource. Now because we're using the chain lightning variant, we'll be getting additional benefits using this particular unique pens to gain additional chain lightning and also auto-seek enemies. We'll of course use this particular boost to gain even more critical chance by having higher movement speed. Finally, using the Tarasha ring allows us to rotate between different elements and dealing even more damage. Now in terms of the Uber unique upgrade, if you want to try this build using the Ring of Stardust, you can replace this particular legendary ring. And similarly, if you do get the Harlequin's Quest and also Teros Might, you can replace the head and also chest piece for even more damage and also survivability. Now briefly going through the skill trees. Over here, we're not using basic spells and we're not using a lot of the core spells. We will be gaining even more maximum resource and then having even more damage by having higher mana. Over here, we're not going with all the points into Flame Shield. we're still benefiting from additional damage reduction from glass cannon, and also over here the ice armor give us a lot more damage. Having 1 point in the defensive tree over here gave us a chance of resetting defensive skills cooldowns. We will of course go into the cooldown reduction coming from the ice blades, and also additional critical strike with lightning spears. And over here we're still getting additional benefits from burning enemies. We'll be getting additional mana by picking up crackling energy, and also we'll be getting additional damage coming from frozen and also chilled enemies. Now we'll be going with the core passive that provides us with more critical strike, shock, and also additional lightning arcs against enemies. Now briefly going through the Paragon board. If you have followed the previous guide, I have not changed the Paragon board. And over here we're using a massive 8 different glyphs. And this is a similar Paragon board I use for both of the build. So should you want to follow this build without having any uber unique items, or should you want to follow the uber unique with Force Orb, which can be stronger in the end game, you can use the similar Paragon board over here. And because I've talked about the Paragon board previously, we don't have to touch this too much. I do like the fact you can have 8 different glyphs for this particular build. Now one thing to notice is that because we're going with a close and also personal build, if you don't want to use a Flame Fader particular glyph, you can go with Territorial. So this is the only adjustment guys over here, and if you want to get a little more defensive, if you want to be more close range in terms of the playstyle for this particular build, you can remove the Flame Fader over here, which is the alternative to go with Territorial to give you a little more damage reduction against close enemies. Now briefly coming over to the skill rotations and also combination tips for this particular build. For this particular build, you want to treat this one as one of the ball lightning sources because you want to get close and also personal with enemies. You will be auto-seeking and also dealing a lot of damage, but as you get closer to enemies, your chain lightning and also picking up the crackling energy enables you to get even more energy, dealing even more damage. Now for majority of the time, you want to have your ice barrier up and then casting your chain lightning and also your defensive and also offensive skills in rotation. Because you want to deal damage with all 3 different elements, make sure you are also casting your Ice Blade and together with a Flame Shield should you take too much damage. And in terms of mobility and also damage dealing potential, the build is definitely up there. Because you can auto-seek and also destroy enemies, as you dive into a pack of enemies, they pretty much melt in seconds. And once you start trying those particular builds, I'm sure you'll enjoy this one. And then once you have the Uber Uniques, you can update the build. Now before we finish the video, in case you guys are wondering, yes, the non-Uber Unique Chain Lightning version is slightly weaker than the Uber Unique Force Board version. But once you have enough Uber Uniques for this build, I do believe the damage and also scaling will also be up there. So this is another choice for you guys to have a look into. If you get bored of the Force Board, then you can consider using the Chain Lightning, which is very similar to the Ball Lightning build in the previous seasons. Now before we finish, if you guys have noticed, I have started posting Diablo and also action RPG videos on my second YouTube channel with Majestic Life. This is because I want to spread out the channels and also to focus one category of games on each of the channels. So for the previous channel, because I'm doing Genshin Impact and also Zenless Zone Zero, we'll focus that on the Gacha channel, and on the second channel, if you haven't subscribed, make sure you follow on this channel for the latest action RPG for Path of Exile 2, for Last Epoch, and also for Diablo 4, and all those related games.